not completely unfounded because the Haftarah of Shabbos Nachamu is Nachamu for Testament, and well, we have the 3 weeks, and the 3 for one indication that something's happening in the calendar is that the Haftarah is different because the default is always that the Haftarah is relating in theme to the Parsha of the week. It's usually usually something directly associated with the Parsha, and sometimes there's a special maftir, let's say it's Rosh Chodesh, and the maftir has to do with the Rosh Chodesh service, so the Haftarah will reflect the maftir, so it will be about Rosh Chodesh, and if it's one of the 4 weeks, Parsha Shkolim, Parsha Hara, Parsha Zachar, the Haftarah will reflect that, because that's the last thing we read in the Torah. During the 3 weeks, the Haftarah reflects none of the above, it reflects the season, so it's 3 Haftarahs of dire warnings, getting more dire as they proceed. So this one, Chazon, we read half the Haftarah in the Eicha tune, just as we do in Tishah B'Av, and it's something serious. Even in the Parsha this week, in Parsha Devarim, there's a sentence in there of Eicha, which is, it's very striking how, when you see these themes, how at times when the Parsha of the week, it intersects with the calendar, like before Rosh Hashanah, as we're ending the year, we have Moshe Rabbeinu's warnings and descriptions of the process of sin and teshuva, and it fits in. And here too, Parshas Devarim, we read this week on Shabbos, and lo and behold, in the very first Aliyah, or maybe the second one, depending, we have a sentence that begins with the word Eicha, and the Haftarah, of course, we selected the Haftarah, has the word Eicha in it, and then on Tishah itself, we read the book of Eicha, and this is somehow a theme that seems to reverberate throughout the generation, and just happens to show up in the weekly Parsha. So the 3 weeks of Haftarah that are warnings, and then following Tishah B'Av, it takes 7 weeks till we get back to our usual practice of Haftarah that relate to the Parsha or to the day. For the 7 weeks following Tishah B'Av, taking us right up to Rosh Hashanah, we're reading Haftarahs of consolation. So there is something to that we talk about. The left hand pushes away and the right hand draws near. That we want to make no mistake about it. That we have Hashem's love is always there, and we can't ever, even in the darkest points, we can't ever lose sight of that. But at the same time, we don't make the mistake of thinking it's like, I think like say, Tainus Esther, for example. Tainus Esther commemorates how the Jews fasted before they went to battle and prayed. It takes us into Purim where we celebrate the redemption. Right? That's not the way it is with Tishah B'Av. Right? We are mourning a situation that's still unresolved. The consolation that we focus on in the subsequent weeks is about the hope for the future and how we take a positive message from this experience and how the mourning brings us to a better place spiritually. But the situation hasn't been fixed. Things will get better. Well, so we can talk about what exactly is the consolation, but I would say, so we can talk about that directly. What is the consolation? I remember hearing Rav Tishah Solomon, he had a British accent. He came to Camp Agada for Shabbos, and he was saying, Nachamu, if you read the Haftarah of Nachamu, it begins with, take comfort, Dabra Lady Yerushalayim, speak to the heart of Jerusalem. Kiru Elah Kol Alter, Kilak Sabiyat Hashem Keflai L'Hachata. She has been smitten by Hashem twofold, doubly for all her sins. Isn't that a lovely consolation? That. What exactly is the consolation? I know we said Nachman with a change in attitude. That's what the word Nachman, and you see this in many places in the Torah. Rashi says this, that the word, and that's why it relates to consolation, because when we comfort a mourner, what are we saying? Well, don't feel bad, right? There's nothing to be said. That's not what we're saying, right? What we really hope and what we try to do, and what happens, it happens over time, and it happens sometimes with the right words. And sometimes what happens internally is that a person takes a situation that is terrible, maybe unacceptable, and begins to accept the reality, and then you can see another side to it. You can look at it from a different angle. and and that's, I think, the way he. I don't remember the rest of the speech. I remember that part of it. But the idea, the idea it's something that's a famous idea from Rabbi Dessler. We talk about whoever mourns for Jerusalem merits to see the consolation. So he says, merits to see its joy. He says that the conventional understanding is that if a person mourns for Jerusalem, then they get rewarded by getting to experience the redemption of Mashiach, which is probably true. Although many people mourn for Jerusalem and died, but we believe in the resurrection. But he says there's a much more, and when you hear his explanation, it's actually quite. It doesn't seem like, I guess you'd say a midrash. It seems like perhaps even the simple meaning of the word bears us out, and it explains how we can sense, even though many people died before Mashiach came. He said what it actually means is whoever mourns for Jerusalem experiences the joy of Jerusalem at the same time. He says because the truth is that he says we mourn for Jerusalem because you miss it and it's important. But so often, most of the time, the vast majority of people, the vast majority of the time, don't really mourn for Jerusalem, or at least not as much as we should be. And we try to force ourselves to do it on Tishah B'Av. But the reason that it's a struggle is that we're not really in touch with what's missing. We don't appreciate what the lack of it is all about, and so therefore, it's not because our lives are so wonderful that we have a hard time mourning. It's because we don't even understand what's missing in our lives. So if someone mourns for Jerusalem, that means that requires a sense of reconnection. It requires us to identify with Jewish people, to understand the meaning of life, what our goal is in this world, why Jerusalem is so important for that goal, and then to appreciate what we're missing when we don't have it. And if someone can do all those things, they're experiencing a tremendous rebuilding of their inner world. Because imagine what we can sit on the floor and read the keynotes and actually experience. I think the Arshtal calls it the Chasam Sofra, and Erev Tishah B'Av we start to cry before Tishah B'Av. We fill up a cup with his tears and we dip the bread and between them half a second. If we, he obviously had a certain perception of things that we don't have. If we could become the Chasam Sofer, we might cry too, but we would be much happier people because what he saw in his inner world and enabled him to feel so. And it's like better to have loved than lost, and however that quote goes. You say, well, I don't know why that person's so sad. I don't really care, but I mean that person has an emotionally intense connection to someone, and if you don't have that connection, you don't really care. But maybe having that connection is something very positive, and love comes with a price. So that's sort of Dessler explains it.
So could that be like wanting to see
to feel to a certain extent, I think you're not wrong. I think that the idea of wanting something and experiencing the desire for it is a positive thing in and of itself. Sometimes I do drink it. Thank you. So, I remember hearing this idea with Aaron that we have a Parshas Pahaloscha. So Hashem says that when you light the candles, tell Aaron when you light the candles, they all have a pointer at the center. It's the famous opening sentences of the Parshas Pahaloscha. And it's not the only place where the Torah talks about lighting the menorah. It seems to just be stuck in there, seemingly not connected to whatever else the Torah is speaking about. But Rashi says that it comes as a segue from the previous parsha, because the previous parsha is Naso, and Naso ends with that same section of the 12 tribes and an inauguration, and how each of the 12 tribes, the leaders of each of the 12 tribes, offered a special set of sacrifices on behalf of his tribe when the Mishkan was inaugurated. And the Rashi says at that time Aaron felt very bad because he was from the tribe of Levi, and his tribe was not represented. As we know, the tribe of Levi is not listed together with the other 12 tribes. So it gets confusing. I'm the one person that we always get confused about it. Yaakov had 12 sons, and there are 12 tribes, so it's not the same listing. Levi was one of Yaakov's 12 sons. The 12 tribes don't include Levi, but they do include Manasseh and Ephraim, were the two sons of Yosef. Levi was a tribe, but they were counted in a separate census. He did not receive. The land of Israel was divided into 12 portions. None of them went to Levi. It's a different calculation. So when the 12 tribes brought their inauguration offerings during the first 12 days of the month of Nisan, the tribe of Levi was not represented, and Aaron felt bad. And that's why Hashem told Moshe to deliver the message to Aaron about lighting the menorah. The message was that what you have not only an opportunity, but you have a greater opportunity than they have to participate in the service of the Mishkan, because you have the permanent privilege of lighting the menorah. I remember one of my rebbeim said that here you had a person who, it's obviously a very powerful lesson in and of itself. Aaron was chosen by Hashem to be the Kohen Gadol, and the father of all Kohanim, and Moshe Rabbeinu didn't have the privilege. And if you want to know, Korach literally risked his life, lost his life, for that, his attempt to receive that privilege. It was such an honor, and for Aaron to have he was the only person who was chosen, except for Pinchas, I guess, who was also a descendant of Aaron, chosen to be a Kohen, and the father of every Kohen who ever came after him subsequently, and to be not only the Kohen, but the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, and Aaron had all those things. And yet, when it came time for the inauguration ceremony, which was clearly a one-time thing, here today, gone tomorrow, and Aaron, clearly through no fault of his own, but based on, I guess, the structural arrangement, the 12 tribes each had a place, and Levi had a different, again, the whole tribe of Levi was consecrated in a special role, and they weren't represented. So what's the big deal? We find a similar thing with Moshe Rabbeinu, that he felt bad that he wasn't involved in building the Mishkan. You kidding me? Moshe was the one who ran the whole project. Yeah, but he didn't do any of the work. So in Aaron's case, he gets this message about lighting the menorah, and it's written in the Torah, a special prophecy. I'm not sure. I don't want to say this definitively. I have a vague recollection that my Rebbe said that there's even some implication that the mitzvah itself, in a certain sense, is there as a consolation. Obviously, the mitzvahs are there from the time of creation, but if the mitzvah is being conveyed to him kind of in response to his yearning and his disappointment, so it's a certain sense as if to say that this mitzvah serves the purpose of filling that vacuum that you feel not having the opportunity. And so my Rebbe said was, look, it's an amazing thing that Aaron, after all the spiritual privileges, the unique privileges that he had that no one else had, he still could feel somehow a sense of loss at not having this one particular opportunity, doing this one particular mitzvah. But you say, okay, so that's the way you felt. When you really value mitzvahs, you value every single opportunity and every mitzvah that you don't get to do. But what was the value of it? He just felt bad. Usually we say that just feeling bad has no purpose in Judaism. We don't want to just feel bad. We talk about even Tishah. We say you feel guilty and it's motivating you to cry to Hashem and to make commitments for the future. And so fine, but if you're just going to feel guilty and down on yourself, and then that's the Yetzer Hara. That's the Yetzer Hara's kind of guilt. So here's Aaron just like kind of feeling bad that he didn't have an opportunity. And what's the significance of it? You say at best maybe it's symptomatic of the fact that he loved mitzvahs, and yet, it was so profound that we have in the Torah a little section of the Torah that was written specifically to address that pain. And the way I think Rebbe explained it is that there is a subtle line, and it is important to be careful. A person have to go. I had to take my aunt to the doctor, and I didn't have the chance to go to my Torah class, and you just feel down about it and resent. That's not right. When we do the right thing, we do what Hashem wants us to do. We have to feel happy about doing the right thing. Even though we say Gedolah Talmud Torah, Talmud Torah is greater than saving a life. There's a story with the author of Talmud, the story. I don't know the details. Probably the way I heard it may have been dramatized or slightly other. But the basic story was that somebody on the way to yeshiva stopped to save a person who was drowning in the river, and he came back in and he was very happy and telling with enthusiasm about what the mitzvah he managed to do. So the author said, you didn't have the privilege of studying Torah at that time. Studying Torah is greater than saving a life. So they explained in the story was that there's no question the person did the right thing. And the author wasn't trying to get him to regret doing the right thing. But you have to understand, right? We say Torah study is a greater mitzvah than saving a life. And, don't walk around sort of patting yourself on the back. You have the privilege because if you actually know the value of Torah study is a higher value. Now, Torah study is greater than shaking a lulav too, but we don't feel bad. I have to shake a lulav because it's Sukkot, but I have to go to the Seder because it's Pesach. Every mitzvah has its time. But we have to understand what the true value is. We only because that informs our decisions and informs our priorities in what we do and what we choose to do, and it also so getting back to.
So the story, speaking of the outdoor Shabbat, when he was in Switzerland with some popular, and they saw him talking to that elderly man, etc. So didn't he say that he wanted that old man to feel remorse for not helping in yeshiva, for not being more religious, because he was totally off?
So I heard that story. I heard a slightly different nuance. I don't remember where I read it, and which way. It's almost the same thing. The story that you're referring to is the author of Talka was in some place. I remember he was in some kind of resort or Switzerland. You say, okay, one of those mountain places in Europe that rabbis seem to always go to. It was the Catskills of the day, and he was seen, in a kind of deep in conversation with an elderly man about the need to build yeshivas and promote Torah for the Jewish people. So afterwards, the student asked him, was this some kind of great philanthropist that you were trying to make official? He said, no, it was an elderly person that was not religious. His children weren't connected with Judaism at all, and he wasn't rich, and he wasn't anything. So he said, so why on earth did you spend all that time talking to him about supporting yeshivas? So the way I heard the story was, he said, do you understand, this man is going to go to the next world, and what does he have? A life is devoid of Torah mitzvot. I just inspired him with this vision of the importance of building Torah, and he wishes that he had the privilege himself to do that. And Hashem counts a good thought like a good deed. So when he comes to Shemayim, he will have the good deed because Hashem counts good intentions. And I inspired him to have that good intention. A little different from saying to have remorse. Now, I don't know, both things could have happened. He might have said both. They're not that different from each other, but I think the way I heard the story, I guess it's more encouraging, but it's a little different nuance. It's more similar to the case of Aaron, where, and that's what I remember this exact question that was posed once to one of my teachers. Let's say you have to take somebody to the doctor and you miss a chance, your regular Torah study. How should you feel? He said, you're not supposed to feel bad about doing the right thing, but at the same time, I remember maybe a different conversation where where Rebbe made the point that, let's say, for example, somebody becomes observant later in life, and they say, oh, if only I wish that in my younger years I had a Jewish education and I could have. They're not blaming themselves, obviously, and Hashem obviously wanted them to have this life, and maybe their decision to become religious later in life is more valuable. It puts them in a higher spiritual place than someone who was raised with it from the youth. But it's still a normal and appropriate feeling that if only I would have had that opportunity. It's a sense of, it's not regret, obviously, and it's not bitterness, but it's a sense of yearning, and that yearning itself is a positive. That's really the key. It is an act of service to Hashem, and that's really the point. Aaron's feeling bad, I wish I could have. It's a feeling of longing. Let's say your friend is getting married, and they send you an invitation, and there's absolutely no way because it's in Australia, and you're not going. You say, Mazel tov, thank you for inviting me. Now, if you really care about the person, you'll say, oh, I feel so bad. I wish I could. And you really mean it. It's not that your friend wants you to feel bad, not that you want to feel bad, but it's an expression of the fact that this relationship is meaningful. And to sort of just say, well, I can't go in. Why should I even think about it? Why should I even? In a way, it's almost like saying this relationship is not important to me. And we're hearing about. It might have been one of the Shkichim in Slobodka or Hebron, I forgot which yeshiva, that it was like some like one evening he just got up and started dancing and singing. And I'm like, everyone's like, what are you doing? He said, well, one of the students was getting married at that time. It was someplace else. He couldn't go, but he said, I wanted to participate. I wanted to, and that's the way we're supposed to be, because these things matter. So, Aaron's feeling of, I wish I could be part of this, to Hashem, that was a positive thing because he wasn't frustrated or resentful or bitter or down on himself or regretful, but he felt a sense of longing that this is such a beautiful thing. I wish I were part of it, and that is something we should feel. And to say, well, I can't have it. It's not important anyways. That's not the right. And that's what Moshe Rabbeinu wanting to see the land of Eretz Yisrael, and that I think is similar to the idea of what that's what I'm saying about mourning for. We mourn for Jerusalem. We experience. Again, it's like saying when you call your friend and say, I feel so bad, I can't come to the wedding. It just kills me that I can't make it. The point is not to make your friend feel bad and not to complain, but that's how you strengthen that relationship. If you don't make that phone call, it weakens the relationship. I remember hearing from one of my rabbis, Yosef, when he was reunited with his brothers. I think before he rebuilt himself, because he insisted that Binyamin's brother should be brought down to see him, and Binyamin said, "I have 10 sons," and he told them their names, and Chazal tell us that the names represent different aspects of his missing brother Yosef, and Yosef was very moved by that. This one is named because he's Rosh, because he was the head of the family, and whatever different things. One of them was Chupim, because I didn't get to go to his chuppah, he didn't get to go to mine. So I remember one of my, I think it was my last Shabbos at the yeshiva, and the Rebbe said, you see that is something significant that Binyamin felt it was important to name his child after that, because if you don't do, I think this is the way. If you don't do that, say, well, I couldn't go. Well, he was lost. Why should we dwell on it? There's no reason to dwell on it and wallow in unhappiness. But if you don't sort of do something, then it just becomes almost like a wedge between people, because it couldn't happen. And I remember my uncle told me at one point that when my grandmother was sick and he came from Israel and going to old family photos, I found out all these relatives I never knew about existed. And he said, yeah, and this one came to America many years before. And they didn't grow up together, so the relationship just wasn't there in the same way, because they just didn't grow up together, siblings. And that Binyamin felt that if he couldn't go to my chuppah, I couldn't go to his. We need to kind of process that. We need to name a child after that, so that we can sort of not have the alternative would be that a barrier was created inadvertently, because drifting along from again, a very different context, but again, a related idea. We know that a Nazir, someone who he takes a vow, so for 30 days, let's say, or whatever period of time, no haircuts, no wine, kind of like the 3 weeks, I guess. So then it says after the term, he brings a few sacrifices and goes back to regular daily life. So it's a temporary period of elevation. He sacrificed himself, and was on a different plane from everyone else. So one of the offerings he brings, and this is noted, widely noted, is that he brings a chatas, a sin offering. What's the sin? He's tzaddik. He's doing something extra that people don't have to do when he's doing it voluntarily. So different interpretations. One statement, Chazal, famous thing, is that depriving yourself, abstaining from things is inherently sinful. Sometimes it's necessary, but it's not what Hashem really wants from us. Okay. One of the commentaries says that he's now downgrading. He was living on a higher spiritual plane, and now he's going to be like an ordinary person, and that's a step backwards. And to counteract the effects of that, brings a sin offering. So what does that mean? The Rishim explained that nobody required to become a Nazir, but he chose to be a Nazir, which means that he took a step up. Now he's taking a step down. It's not really a step down. It's just what goes up must come down. He's going back to the regular baseline. But when you go backwards, even if it's just because, I went forward, now I got to go backwards, there's an automatic psychological sense that I'm regressing. I'm going down the ladder instead of up. So if he doesn't do anything about that, so they say we tell the girls to go to seminary for a year in Israel, they come back, and the teachers say, well, going back to America, if you had been in America the entire time, maybe you would, you live in America, you have your shul and your classes and your families, whatever it is. Like when you go to Israel and you have all of this, then you go back to America, it's easy to feel like, okay, I'm obviously going to a more mundane existence now, and that itself can have a negative effect. So the sin offering basically says no, it's a concrete action that creates, and it addresses that emotion. The person says, no, I'm not downgrading, I have to, but we need something. The point is we need to do something spiritually positive to make sure that we don't just fall into the de facto, oh, I'm in these circumstances, I must be this, I must be that. And we address it in a proactive way.
Some of us feel every mostly Yom Kippur, you go in with a lot of positive things, maybe you made some positive changes, but they don't all last.
Right. They don't. And circumstances have a lot to do with that.
Shabbos is,
yeah.
Sunday, Shabbos, and Sunday, like you know, Shabbos, if you don't have a big
yeah, but maybe that explains. I never thought of it that way. I know they say about after the Shemona Esrei every day we say Ashrei Gavol Tzion, and I remember hearing that we talk about preparing for davening, and the days of old they would spend a lot of time before davening, getting themselves into the proper state, and then once you're up in that proper state, then you have to go back down, and then the Gavol Tzion kind of ushers you back into the regular world. I wasn't quite sure what that meant. What if you don't do that? What's going to happen? Will you be stuck in an elevated plane? Well, maybe that's the answer. The answer is if you don't do that, you come down too fast and too hard, you will fall because it's like stepping out of the shul right into this pool. You need to have something like an airlock in between where you gradually, because if you don't, otherwise it's like, how can I take, the negative message creates a very bad vibe when you go from a place of, even when it's necessary, when you go from a place of holiness and elevation into a more mundane existence, if you don't do something to ease the transition, if you go from the high holidays and you need to detox a little bit from all that davening. Right, okay, there's nothing, right.
That instead of, it's bitter and there's no power, and you take all that energy and it's not just when you're there so that you can use that energy.
Okay, right. You have like this. It's like when you I think what's the example? It's like you take too much of something, so you gotta you take 3 doses in one day, so you gotta take 3 coffees, and you gotta go for a few hours to let it cycle through your system and use up that energy. But yeah, maybe that's what it is. Like we have a high concentration of holidays. And we need to ride on that and to use it.
How about you have to go into that state to fix something?
Well, the Torah just describes what it means to be a Nazir. It doesn't get into why someone would be, and there can be different reasons. Shimshon, for example, was mandated to be a Nazir by an angel from before he was born. I think this sense is not really. That being a Nazir is elevating yourself. There's no direct association, as far as I know, with sinfulness. It's simply desire to live on a higher plane. The Gemara has a story. It says one of the Tanaim was a Kohen, and he said, I never ate from the sacrificial offering of a Nazir, or maybe a Nazir that particularly a Nazir that became impure, because that can happen sometimes inadvertently, and then the Nazir has to bring sacrifices and restart his Nazir. He said, I think it was in that particular scenario, he never ate from the sacrifice because he felt that the vow was taken on improperly, especially if the person became impure. They clearly didn't keep it properly, except for one example. And he gave the example of he once met a man, a handsome young man with a beautiful head of hair, and he said, why would you, the process requires him to shave off all that hair. He says, why would you want to do that? You're so good looking. And he said, I would hear the whole story,